Today we're painting Poxwalkers. I started off with a black undercoat first, being the colours in this are going to be reasonably dark. And the first colour for the flesh is initially Nurgling Green. After this I've done a dry brush with Underhive Ash just to try and pick out some of the details for the fleshy areas. And you may want to apply a second coat. Once this is dry, I've used X-ray flame to give it a horrible fleshy look, and now I'm applying Underhive Ash again over the fleshy areas. This time I'm only doing it once, just to help to once again pick out those uppermost areas for the flesh. For the cloth areas, I started off with Corax White first, and this takes a couple of coats because you want a good solid coat of this initial white. And then White Sky is used to pick out the edges to give a bit of depth, but I've chosen not to use any grades in this. I just want to keep it as pure white. For the blood, first off I used a mix of Blood for the Blood God and Agrax Earthshade. There's two reasons why I'm doing this. One reason is I want to have two tones of blood, and this means the first coat is going to be a little bit darker, but also because you added the Agrax Earthshade, it's also going to thin the paint down as well. So for the overall look, it will give a bit of definition of showing some of the blood looking more fresher and more recent than some of the older blood. So this initial coat gives it that kind of older look. And you'll also notice I'm using a very old brush where the bristles are spread out all over the place. This is a great way of making the painting look more natural. And then the second coat after this is just the Blood for the Blood God, again using one of the old brushes. And like I said, this way you end up with blood that looks like you've got some old blood there and you've got some more recent blood as well. This is a quick look at the end result for the blood. I wanted at least some parts of these miniatures to have the same colours as the rest of the miniatures for this particular collection. So Death Guard Green was the first colour used for things like the pouches, and then for the second coat I've used Nurgling Green, and this is literally just applied onto the very edges. Now you might think to use a green shade on these areas, being they are green. However, because these miniatures are somewhat dirty and repulsive, I've used Agrax Earthshade on these areas, and that way it helps to emphasize that kind of image you're trying to create by giving these areas that dirty look. For the pot marks and spots, I've initially used Bloodletter glaze, and I've put a couple of coats on with this, so it takes 2 or 3 coats to build it up to get those spots looking like they're nice and sore. And afterwards I thin down some Flaskets yellow with some Lamia medium. I wanted to thin it down so it's slightly more opaque. And the main thing to remember here is don't put the yellow on every single spot, because if you put it on every single spot it will look too over the top. It looks more realistic by only having it on some spots and not on others. For the horns, I wanted to keep them reasonably dark because that way it helps to tone the miniatures down, and I started off with Mechanica Standard Grey, and afterwards I used Nurgling Green just to pick out the very edges, and this also helps to make the horns blend in with the flesh because you're using the Nurgling Green again. However, if you prefer a more brown type horn, then I will leave a link in the description below for a different way of painting horns if you prefer that instead. The maggots were quickly painted with a turquoise initially, and then painted with Nurgling Green, I wanted to keep them somewhat similar to the fleshy colours of the rest of the miniature, but I wanted to make them look just slightly different. So this is why I chose to use the turquoise first, and therefore give them somewhat of a similarity, but at the same time different. Lastly, I chose to paint the teeth and the eyes white first, just to make sure there wasn't any colours underneath. And then I thinned down some flash kits yellow again and applied it into these areas. Then obviously I put the pupils into the eyes, and then for the teeth I used Agrax Earthshade, and I chose to give them yellow eyes because I wanted to make the miniatures look unhealthy, and I think that giving them yellow eyes as opposed to white ones achieves this goal. If you like the video, remember to subscribe, click the notification bell, and also share the video with your friends.